TDH Deck Building. I'm your host, Demo, and this is Maja Bretagard Protector. This is another commander that I didn't think I would be building a deck around because it's really, to be quite honest, it's a little boring and it's kind of obvious. Usually I don't tackle commanders where it's so obvious what you want to be doing. However, I had an interesting idea. It's a deck I've been wanting to make for a while where I'm sort of hating on big creatures. You know, if I have a commander that is not a big creature and is going to be making small creatures, I thought, why not try that out? So I made a deck with Maja that is not super obvious, but I think is going to work really, really well. White is in particular really good at hating on big creatures. So Dusk to Dawn, for example, right? We're going to destroy all creatures with power 3 or greater. If all of our creatures are power 2 or less, this isn't going to hurt us at all, right? There is all kinds of effects like this in the format. Marble Titan is another one, right? Creatures with power 3 or greater, they just don't untap during their untap step. Obviously Marble Titan has a power of 3 or greater, but he's just going to sit there and lock down all of our opponent's big creatures. This is a go wide strategy, right? We're going to have a whole bunch of little 2/2s. 1/1s are probably more like 2/2s, and all of our opponent's creatures are going to be tapped down, are not going to be able to be used. I also have Meekstone and Crackdown, 2 more cards that are going to be hating on any of those creatures, power 3 or greater. Through my travels, deck building and looking for all these cards, it's really, there is a lot of cards out there, and for some reason, there's 3 seems to be the cutoff, right? There's a lot of cards that are liking power 2 or less and are really hating power 3 or greater. So I thought if we just build, if that's the theme of our deck, then it's pretty easy to build a deck around that, right? We also have Retribution of the Meek and Citywide Bust. This is going to be destroying all creatures power 4 or greater, but that also works for us. And Citywide Bust is toughness 4 or greater. But again, all of our creatures fit under that window, so we're good. And I also have Divine Presence. This is a card that I just did in my 10 cards you should be playing in your commander decks. And as I said in the video, it is perfect in any deck where you have a lot of small creatures. Basically, you can't take more than 3 damage from any source. No permanent, no player. This card is really powerful. So if someone casts a Blasphemous Act, it's going to deal 3 damage to everything instead of 13. But more importantly, it's not going to hurt us. This card doesn't hurt us at all. If we swing with one of our creatures, it's going to do 2 damage or maybe 3, right? But our opponent swings with their giant creature, it's only going to deal 3 damage. So this card, I think, works great in this deck. I do have a couple other Anthem effects, Angel of Invention and Trostani Discordant. Trostani Discordant is very similar to our commander. That's the first card I thought of when I first saw Maja. An Anthem in Celsnia that's making tokens, very similar. I didn't want to put too many Anthem effects in here because we want our creatures to stay small. But what if Maja dies a couple of times and we can't afford to recast her? It's good to have a replacement. So Angel Invention and Trostani, they also make tokens, which we want. We want some more 1/1 tokens. Karametra, I think, is great in this deck just because it's getting us lands, right? So we put Karametra down and it just sits there, and then every time we cast a creature, we go get a land, which gets us a 1/1 token. This isn't really a landfall deck. I didn't really go down that route. You're going to be playing lands anyway, right? We're in green, so we are going to be obviously doing lots of ramping and whatnot. So I really didn't think it was necessary to focus on that because it kind of just happens anyway. It's sort of like building a Tatyova deck. There's just really nothing special you need to do. You can just make a normal Semic deck and put Tatyova as the commander and you'll do just fine. So I have Fanatical Devotion and I have Perilous Forays. So we want to have a use for all of these tokens that we're making. So I thought, okay, well, sacrifice a creature, regenerate a creature. We can sacrifice one of those 1/1 tokens to save our commander because we really do want our commander to stay in play. And she does cost 5. That's a lot, and we don't want to be casting her a whole bunch. Perilous Forays is probably the best card in this deck. We're going to pay 1, sacrifice one of those tokens, go get a land card and put it into play tapped, make another token, and repeat, right? So basically for every 1 mana we have, we can go get a land out of our deck. This card is great in this deck. I also have Sidar Kondo of Jumara. He is going to make all of our, again, we're taking advantage now of the fact that we have these low-powered creatures. So now all of our 2/2 creatures are going to be unblockable. Revelark is sort of breaking the rules a little bit, right? Because not a 2/2 creature, it's got a power of 4, but that's okay. It can just sit there, and because we have so many creatures, power 2 or less, including our commander, by the way, this can just stay in play. We can even just let our commander go to the graveyard if it dies, and if we have a Revelark in play, because the Revelark will eventually get it back. Mentor of the Meek, obviously, no-brainer in this deck. It's going to be drawing us lots of cards every time those tokens come into play. And I also have Inspiring Commander, and, probably a lot of people haven't seen this card before. This is quote-unquote cheating a little bit. This is actually an arena card, I believe. I came across it purely by accident one day, and I was like, oh man, that just works great in a couple of my decks. Whenever another creature with power 2 or less enters the battlefield under your control, you gain 1 life and draw a card. That's fantastic. I mean, it costs 6, but it's basically an improved Mentor of the Meek because you don't have to pay the mana. I'm throwing this out there, and you can even look at this card for other decks. I mean, this is a card. This is a Magic card. It is, as far as I know, it was made only for Arena. There's a couple of cards that were made only for Arena. But if it's a Magic card, it's a Magic card. To hell with Wizards of the Coast if they just want to make cards only for Arena that we can't play in real life. So you can just make a proxy of this card. That's what I do. I would just make a proxy of this card to put in this deck. If you want to do that, if your friends, your play group is okay with it, I can't imagine why they wouldn't be. It is a legal Magic card, so that's entirely up to you. It works great in this deck. So we're going to have lots of creatures, so we need to take advantage of the fact that we have lots of creatures, okay? Camaraderie, right? We're going to gain X life, draw X cards, where X of them are creatures we control, and then they all get +1/+1. The temporary boosts are good, because temporary boost will shut off at the end of turn, so our creatures will still untap. If, say, there's a Meek Stone in play, we don't have to worry about that, right? Shamanic Revelation, just another one. We're not going to gain any life off of this because we don't have any creatures with power 4 or greater, I guess. The card draw is the important part, right? Parallel Lives and Annoyed Procession. I mean, anytime you're playing a token deck, these are no-brainers. I know right away people think of cards like Cathar's Crusade and Divine Visitation. Those are cards that would be great in this deck. We're just not going that route, okay? If you want to go that route, fine, but then you're making a completely different deck. All the hating on big creatures, it just isn't going to work if you have those cards in this deck, right? All of the benefiting, right? You think about Mentor of the Meek. If you have too many pump effects, or if you have Divine Visitation or something, Mentor of the Meek is just not going to do anything. He's just going to shut off. So now we're not going to get any advantage of that. So I know you think, well, why not go that route? That you automatically think that Cathar's Crusade and Divine Visitation are just better cards in this deck, but then we're shutting off all that card draw, right? Now we can't have Meek Stone or Marble Titan in our deck because they're going to tap down our creatures and they won't be able to untap. It just doesn't work, right? The strategy we're going with, and I've done this before, and it works. I know it seems odd to avoid powerful effects like that, but in the end, it's going to work for us because we're taking advantage of the fact that our creatures are small. I also got Awakening Zone and Arasta, the Endless Web, just really good token makers. Awakening Zone I just really like. It's ramp, really, right? It's making tokens. Those tokens will actually be 1/2s because of the anthem that our commander's giving us, but we can also just sack them to cast things. So I really like that card a lot. And Arasta is a card that's just going to sit there and make us tokens. Rootborn Defenses is great because it has Populate. So obviously in any deck where you have lots of creatures, even if those are token creatures, you have to have effects like this that are going to save you from board wipes, because board wipes are just a blowout. Rootborn Defenses is great because it has Populate. I also have Selfless Spirit and Dauntless Escort. Again, just put as many of these as you can as possible. I have Flawless Maneuver and Rapid Vigor. Trust me, you can't have too many of these effects in a deck where you are going to be making lots of creatures. Our commander makes lots of creatures, so just having these effects to save our board is going to be huge. Harvest Season and Throne of the God Pharaoh, they're both going to be good in this deck because we are going to have lots of tapped creatures. Throne of the God Pharaoh is just going to be great because it can just speed up that win for us. I also have Growing Rites of Itlamok. I'll just say right now, if you want to put Gaia's Cradle in this deck, it obviously is going to be good. I don't have it. Again, it's one of those cards that is sort of on the edge. It's also really expensive. I'm not sure how much. I don't have any in any of my decks. But Gaia's Cradle, to me, the reason I don't put it in decks isn't necessarily because of how expensive it is, but it is because it is one of those cards that when people see it, it upsets people to see a card that is that powerful and is really expensive. You put a card in your deck that is expensive, that's not so bad. But if you put a card in your deck that is really powerful and also really expensive, it tends to, piss some people off. I find. You can do what you want. If you want to put Gray's Cradle in this deck, absolutely, it's great in this deck. And then, of course, we have to win, right? So how are we going to win? I mean, we're going to be attacking a lot. I know, don't underestimate the fact that you can just attack with 2/2 creatures all the time and eventually wear your opponents down. However, and I know right away everyone's going to say Craterhoof Behemoth, that's going to be the best card in this deck. And again, it will. I'm not putting it in. I hate that card. So it's, for me, it's just on principle. You can put it in here. It is going to be good in this deck, no question. I like to go with alternatives, okay? Earthshaker Giant is another card that I just talked about in my 10 cards you should be playing. It is a Craterhoof alternative. It is cheaper, right? It only costs 6. It's going to give all of our creatures overrun, so I think that works great. There's lots of alternatives, right? There's a lot. You can put Triumph of the Hordes, another card that I don't ever play, but it would definitely work in this deck. You know, if you just want to give your creatures an overrun for a turn, there's just so many options. I put the ones that I like in this deck. You can swap out a couple. I mean, obviously there's a couple that don't work really well, like Pathbreaker Ibex, because we don't have big creatures. But other than that, there's so many options. It's not even going to be a tough one to figure out. But that's pretty much it. I mean, there's really not much to the deck. Like I said, Maja is a little on the boring side for me. I mean, landfall decks, again, why not just say landfall on the card? I don't know why they do that. The thing about this, though, is because it is a little generic, there is a lot of ways you can go with it. I'm actually surprised. Another reason why I'm doing this deck tech is because this card isn't very popular, you know. Like I checked on EDH Rec and a couple of days ago, and it's way down there, right? She only has 20 decks right now on EDH Rec. I mean, it's beneath Svella, which I thought Svella was going to be really unpopular, and Maja is even more unpopular. If people are struggling to figure out how exactly to make this deck, then that's why I like to make a deck tech. I like to make deck techs for cards that I'm interested in, but also for cards that people might be interested in making that they're maybe having a little bit of a trouble, you know, figuring out what they can do with it. And I just think this is a neat little strategy to go with, right? You can just make a deck where you're playing lots of lands and making lots of tokens. I don't know. That's just kind of boring for me. So I always like to throw in a neat little strategy, some way to give ourselves an advantage. There's already enough decks out there that are playing lots of lands and playing lots of big creatures. So let's give ourselves an advantage over those other decks, right? And I think this works great. Yeah, that's Maja, Bretagard Protector. That's it for today. Thanks for tuning in.